I am Audrey Thompson, 32, and 3 hours ago. Still working from home, my father, Gerald, mocked across our Thanksgiving table, eyeing my casual attire with disdain. I simply nodded, feeling my phone buzz in my pocket. Glancing down discreetly, I read, "Acquisition of Strathmore Dynamics complete. You now own 100% of your family's company." I looked up at my father's smug face and smiled. He had no idea what was coming. Before I dive into how I went from being the family disappointment to owning their legacy, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you the most. Growing up as a Thompson meant privilege, prestige, and suffocating expectations. Our family estate sat on 5 acres in Connecticut, a monument to old money and older traditions. But what outsiders saw as a picture-perfect wealthy family was actually a cold, emotionless machine designed to perpetuate the Strathmore Dynamics legacy. Strathmore Dynamics wasn't just a company, it was our family identity. My grandfather, Warren Thompson, his portrait hung in our foyer, stern eyes seemingly following you everywhere, a constant reminder of the Thompson standard. My father, Gerald, took over when I was just a child, expanding the company further with an iron fist and ruthless business tactics. He ruled both the company and our family with the same authoritarian approach. Growing up, dinner conversations revolved exclusively around the day stock price and upcoming business deals. "Business is about dominance, Audrey. The Thompsons don't just compete, we conquer," he would lecture, pounding the mahogany dining table for emphasis. Mimithor Elaine performed her role with precision, the perfect executive wife. She hosted immaculate corporate events, maintained social connections with other business families, and never ever contradicted my father. Her life advice to me consisted mainly of how to dress appropriately for board member dinners, and which fork to use at business luncheons. A Thompson woman reflects the company's image. Audrey, she would remind me whenever I chose comfort over convention. Appearance is everything. My brother Ethan was the golden child. Harvard Business School, captain of the rowing team, and eagerly absorbing every word of my father's business philosophy. By 18, he was sitting in on board meetings. By 22, he had his own office at headquarters with a secretary. The succession plan was clear to everyone. Ethan understands what it means to be a Thompson. Exactly what was expected of her, and dedicated herself to social appearances and charity galas that benefited the family image. "Why can't you just try to fit in?" she would whisper to me at family functions, genuinely confused by my resistance. And then there was me, the family puzzle piece that wouldn't fit no matter how hard they tried to force it. From an early age, I questioned everything. Why weren't we exploring digital innovation when our competitors were? Why did we treat our factory workers like disposable resources instead of valuable team members? "That's not how business works, Audrey." When I proudly shared my earnings at dinner, my father chuckled. "Not fixing Mrs. Wilson's printer," he said. Immediately turning to Ethan to discuss a real estate acquisition, my mother patted my hand consolingly. I still remember the sting of those words, not because they were cruel, but because, in their minds, they were being kind by lowering their expectations of me. I spent weeks creating a detailed proposal complete with projected savings and implementation plan. My father agreed to let me present it at a family dinner. This could reduce downtime by 22% and save approximately $430,000 in the first year alone. Theoretical models from a teenager? Adorable. But we'll stick with the systems designed by actual professionals. Later, I discovered that Ethan had presented a remarkably similar system 2 years later. One clearly based on my proposal, and my father had implemented it immediately, praising my brother's business acumen. By my senior year of high school, the pattern was clear. In the Thompson family, your worth was measured by your contribution to Strathmore Dynamics. And in their eyes, I had nothing to offer. The black sheep, the dreamer, the disappointment. I began plotting my escape from the suffocating world of Strathmore Dynamics long before I left for college. I would build something of my own, something meaningful, something that would prove them wrong. The college application process became my first real battleground for independence. The Thompson tradition was clear. Wharton for undergraduate business, Harvard for MBA. My father had the alumni connections lined up, the donations made, the strings ready to be pulled. "Business administration is in your blood," he insisted. "Even if you never run Strathmore, you need to understand how our world works." I applied to MIT for computer science instead. The night I announced my decision at dinner remains one of the most tension-filled memories of my young adult life. My father's face turned a shade of crimson I'd never seen before. "Computer science," he sputtered. "What exactly do you plan to do with that?" "Fix people's laptops for a living." Sustainability, my father interrupted, almost spitting the word. Another buzzword from people who've never Had to meet a production quota or satisfy shareholders. Ethan smirked across the table. Let her go play with computers, Dad. She was never going to be involved in the real business anyway. Gerald, perhaps Audrey could bring a fresh perspective to our IT department someday. That was the closest thing to support I'd ever received, though even that came with the assumption I'd eventually join Strathmore. I left for MIT with my father's partying words echoing in my ears. When this phase is over, there will still be a place for you. In the family business, MIT was like breathing fresh air after years in a stuffy room. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who valued innovation over tradition. I thrived in this environment, my confidence growing with each successful project and each professor's encouragement. I met Natalie right during freshman orientation, and she quickly became the supportive best friend I'd never had. Unlike my family, she actually listened when I talked about my ideas. The way you connect business problems with tech solutions, it's like you speak both languages fluently. During sophomore year, I landed an internship at Green Tech Innovations, a startup focused on creating efficiency solutions for manufacturing. My boss, Margaret Foster, became the mentor I'd always craved. Unlike my father, she didn't see my questioning nature as insubordination, but as valuable critical thinking. Never stop asking why something can't be better, she advised me. The moment you accept that's just how it's done is the moment innovation dies. I returned to Green Tech each summer, soaking up knowledge about sustainable business practices and cutting-edge technology. I watched as they transformed struggling factories into efficient, environmentally responsible operations while actually increasing profitability. It was everything I had tried to tell my family was possible. Meanwhile, holidays at home became increasingly uncomfortable. Each break began with interrogations about when I would get serious and ended with thinly veiled disappointment. During Christmas dinner my junior year, my father raised his glass for a toast, whose foundation gala raised over $2 million for children's charities. With several Strathmore clients in attendance, Thompson excellence continues. I sat there unmentioned. After graduation, I received an offer from Strathmore Dynamics, a position in the IT department reporting to a manager who had been with the company for 30 years and still used a flip phone. The salary was insultingly low, especially compared to what they'd offered Ethan straight out of college. It's an opportunity to prove yourself, my father said, as if he was being generous. You can't expect to start at the top just because you're a Thompson. I declined and accepted a position at Innovate Tech, a forward-thinking company that was revolutionizing manufacturing through artificial intelligence and sustainable practices. My first apartment was tiny, a studio in Boston that would have fit in our mansion's foyer. When my mother visited once, my father never did. She looked around with poorly disguised horror. Darling, there's no need to live like this. Just come work for Strathmore. We'll set you up with a proper condo. I'm building my own path, Mom, I explained. I need to do this my way. She smiled sadly, clearly believing I was making a terrible mistake. I just hope this rebellion phase doesn't last too long. You're missing out on your birthright. What she couldn't understand was that I was discovering my actual birthright. Not the Thompson name or Strathmore Dynamics, but my own capabilities, untethered from family expectations. At Innovate Tech, I flourished. Within 2 years, I was leading a team developing efficiency software that reduced manufacturing waste by up to 40%. My salary tripled. I made connections throughout the industry with people who respected me for my mind, not my last name. And with each success, the emotional distance between me and my family grew wider. Holiday gatherings became exercises in restraint as I listened to my family discuss business strategies that were becoming increasingly outdated in a rapidly evolving marketplace. When I tried to contribute to these conversations, sharing insights from my industry experience, I was patted on the head metaphorically. That might work for those little tech startups, my father would dismiss, but Strathmore operates on a different level. Real manufacturing, real products, real business. By 27, I had risen to Director of Sustainable Innovation at Innovate, with several patents under my belt and a growing reputation in the industry. I also had a vision for something bigger, a company that would bridge the gap between old school manufacturing and cutting-edge technology, creating sustainable solutions that didn't sacrifice profitability. The final push came during a particularly tense Easter dinner, when my father spent 20 minutes lecturing about flash-in-the-pan tech companies, while Ethan nodded vigorously. That night, I began writing the business plan for what would become Ecotech Solutions. It was time to build something of my own. Starting Ecotech Solutions required capital, and while I had saved diligently, I needed more. Fortunately, my grandmother Ruth had left me a modest inheritance when she passed, the only family member who seemed to believe I might forge my own path. She had secretly encouraged my independence. Having been something of a rebel herself in her youth, before being absorbed into the Thompson machine through marriage. You remind me of myself before I learned to stay quiet. She once whispered to me, "Don't make my mistake." I used her $250, zero bequest, seed funding and moved into an even smaller apartment to stretch my runway. My dining table became my office, my bed, my conference room. 18-hour days became my norm as I developed the initial software platform while simultaneously building business connections. When my family learned about my little project, the mockery began in earnest. "Audrey is playing entrepreneur now," Ethan announced at Thanksgiving that year. "How adorable." "What exactly does your company do again?" my father asked, his tone making it clear he didn't consider it a real company at all. I explained our mission: creating integrated software-hardware solutions that helped traditional manufacturing companies transition to sustainable practices while improving efficiency and reducing costs. "So basically, you're selling fancy spreadsheets to factories," my brother summarized with a smirk. "Actually, our first product increased production by 32% at Wilson Manufacturing, while reducing their carbon footprint by 28%, I countered. My father waved his hand dismissively. "Wilson is a tiny operation. Try implementing something like that at Strathmore's scale. It's fantasy." "I'd be happy to put together a proposal," I began. "Strathmore doesn't need saving, especially not by improv and technology," he interrupted. "We've survived for 3 generations doing things our way. Those early years were brutal. For every client success, there were dozens of rejections. For every step forward, the market or regulations or unexpected challenges would push me to steps back. I maxed out my credit cards, skipped meals, and once had to choose between paying rent and making payroll for my first 2 employees. I chose payroll and slept in my office for 3 weeks. We had worked together at Innovate Tech, and he believed in my vision enough to take a 70% pay cut and work for mostly equity. "The way you combine practical business solutions with environmental responsibility is revolutionary," he said. "Traditional manufacturing is heading for a cliff and you're building them a bridge. They just don't know they need it yet." Slowly, we built a team of believers. Jason Reed, a brilliant programmer who could translate complex manufacturing processes into elegant code. Sophia Martinez, a chemical engineer who understood how to optimize physical systems. Kyle Bennett, a marketing strategist who knew how to speak the language of old-school manufacturing executives. Our first major breakthrough came 18 months in when we saved Brighton Steel from bankruptcy by implementing our resource management system. Their CEO became our most vocal advocate, opening doors that had previously been slammed in our faces. Yet, at every family gathering, my growing success was minimized or dismissed entirely. "How's your app business?" my father would ask, deliberately mischaracterizing what we did. When I mentioned our growing client list, Ethan would counter. With Strathmore's latest acquisition, when I shared our sustainability metrics, my father would talk about Strathmore's quarterly profits. When I described our innovative solutions, my mother would quickly change the subject to CLA's latest charity function. The most painful dismissal came after we secured our first $1 million contract with Westfield Manufacturing, a direct competitor to Strathmore in certain markets. Instead of seeing this as validation of my business acumen, my family viewed it as almost treasonous. "Consorting with the enemy now?" my father said coldly. "Is this how you get back at me for not handing you an executive role at Strathmore?" "This isn't about Strathmore," I tried explaining. "Westfield was willing to innovate while I what?" He challenged while I continued to run a profitable business that employs thousands and has stood the test of time. "Your little experiment is helping our competitors undercut us. How do you think that makes you look to this family?" I left that dinner early, fighting back tears of frustration. Back at my now proper office, I threw myself into work with renewed determination. If they couldn't see my value, I would create something so successful they would be forced to acknowledge it. "You know what the problem is?" Daniel said late one night as we reviewed expansion plans. "Your family can't see past their own paradigm to truly disrupt an industry. You have to think outside its established patterns. That's why outsiders often create the most revolutionary changes." He was right. My outsider perspective, so long considered a weakness in my family, was actually my greatest strength. I understood both worlds, the traditional manufacturing mindset and the technological possibilities that could transform it. Over the next 2 years, Ecotech Solutions grew exponentially. We expanded from software into integrated hardware solutions, developed proprietary sustainable materials processes, and built a client list that included some of the most forward-thinking manufacturers in the country. We secured a substantial funding round led by investors who specifically believed in combining profitability with environmental responsibility. Our company valuation hit $50 million, Then $150 million. We moved into real offices. Our team grew to 60 people. Then, over 100. Through it all, my family's attitude barely shifted. When I was featured in Business Innovators magazine, my father glanced at the article and remarked, "Nice publicity. Let's see if you're still around in 5 years." Ethan was more directly hostile. Anyone can look good during an economic boom and with investors' money. The real test is longevity and operating without training wheels. What they didn't know, what I had begun to hear through industry channels, was that Strathmore Dynamics was facing significant challenges. Their refusal to adapt was finally catching up to them in a marketplace that increasingly valued sustainability and technological integration. The first public signs of Strathmore's troubles appeared about 3 years into my ecotech journey. Their quarterly earnings report showed a 15% decline year-over-year. Not catastrophic, but significant for a company that had shown consistent growth for decades. My father dismissed it as market fluctuation at the next family dinner, but I noticed the tight line of his mouth, the extra glass of scotch he poured himself. Ethan was uncharacteristically quiet that evening, his usual boasting about deals and acquisitions notably absent. Claire's husband, who worked in finance, kept checking his phone discreetly. Industry analysis reports began highlighting resistance to adaptation as a potential long-term liability. New environmental regulations were increasing their compliance costs, while competitors, some using ecotech solutions, were meeting these challenges more efficiently. I could see the writing on the wall, even if my family couldn't or wouldn't. Strathmore Dynamics was a 20th century company, trying to operate with 20th century methods in a 21st century market. I made a decision that surprised even me. I would try to help. I've been watching Strathmore's market position, and I think ecotech could help. We've developed systems specifically for companies with your manufacturing profile. He cut me off with a dismissive wave. "Audrey, I appreciate that your little company is doing well in its niche, but Strathmore doesn't need saving. We've weathered fluctuations for nearly a century. Sustainability isn't just about environmental responsibility anymore. It's about economic survival. Our systems could reduce your production costs by at least 30%, while bringing you into compliance with the new regulations before they fully kick in." My father's expression hardened. "So now you're an expert on my business? The business you walked away from, the business you've never spent a day actually running?" "I'm not claiming to be an expert on Strathmore specifically," I said carefully, "but I am an expert on manufacturing technology and sustainability implementation. We've helped dozens of companies, smaller companies, different companies, not legacy operations like when you've run a business for more than 5 minutes, perhaps I'll consider your advice. Until then, focus on your own affairs and leave Strathmore to those who understand it." I left his study feeling a complex mix of emotions, frustration, concern, and a strange sense of foreboding. I had genuinely wanted to help, but his pride wouldn't allow it. Meanwhile, ecotech continued at its ascent. Offices in Germany and Singapore, industry awards and recognition poured in. Richard Palmer, a board member at Strathmore who had always been friendly to me, reached out for lunch one day. Away from my family's eyes and ears, he was candid. "Your father won't admit it, but Strathmore is in trouble, Audrey. The company has taken on significant debt to maintain the appearance of growth. 3 of their major clients are considering non-renewal of contracts. The new manufacturing facility in Michigan is hemorrhaging money due to outdated processes." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. Richard looked at me steadily. "Because you might be the only person who both understands what needs to be done and cares enough about the Thompson legacy to do it. Your father and brother are too entrenched in their ways to see the necessary changes." "I've offered help." I said. "They're not interested." "They might not have a choice soon," he replied grimly. "There's talk of seeking outside investors or even selling. If things didn't improve in the next 2 quarters, the news hit me harder than expected. Despite everything, Strathmore was still my family's legacy. The thought of it failing or being sold to some corporate raider who would strip its assets and fire loyal employees was painful." At the next family gathering, my mother's birthday, I could see the strain more clearly, his usual cockiness replaced by a brittle defensiveness. Even Claire seemed subdued. During dinner, I made one more attempt. "I've been reading about the new regulations affecting the manufacturing sector," I began cautiously. "Here we go," Ethan muttered. I ignored him. "Many companies are struggling with compliance costs, but there are solutions that can actually turn these challenges into opportunities for modernization and efficiency." My father's knuckles whitened around his fork. "Audrey, not everyone believes in sacrificing profit for fashionable environmental concerns." "That's just it," I pressed. "The solutions I'm talking about increase profitability while achieving compliance. Is this another pitch for your company's? My father asked coldly, using a family dinner to prospect for clients. The unfairness of his accusations stung. I'm trying to help, Dad. Strathmore is family despite everything. I don't want to see it struggle, Ethan interjected loudly. Who says we're struggling? I knew from industry sources that the Davidson contract had been significantly smaller than anticipated and came with terms that favored the client heavily. A sign of Strathmore's weakened negotiating position. I'm glad to hear that, I said carefully. But if you ever want to discuss how integrating sustainable technology could help Strathmore's bottom line, I'm always available. We'll be sure to call if we need advice on how to run the company. That's been successful since before you were born, my father said with finality, effectively ending the conversation. 2 weeks later, Richard called me again. They're looking for buyers. Audrey, quietly but actively. Your father would rather sell Strathmore than admit it needs to change. An industry analysis I gathered on Strathmore Dynamics. With the right leadership and technological integration, it could thrive again. A plan began forming in my mind. Audacious, perhaps even outrageous, but potentially perfect. What if Ecotech Solutions acquired Strathmore Dynamics? I would need to move carefully. If my family knew I was the buyer, they would reject the offer out of hand, regardless of its merits. I would need to work through intermediaries. Perhaps a holding company that obscured my involvement until the deal was done. That my vision for manufacturing's future was not just viable but necessary. It would save Strathmore, protect its employees, and finally force my family to acknowledge that I had been right all along. The ethical questions troubled me. Was this about helping Strathmore or proving a point? Was I seeking to save my family's legacy or exact some form of revenge? After days of soul-searching and lengthy discussions with Daniel and our leadership team, I concluded that my motivations, while complex, were ultimately sound. Strathmore was a good acquisition target for Ecotech, on purely business terms. That my personal history with the company added an emotional dimension didn't invalidate the business logic. The decision made, I began putting the pieces in place. For what would become the most audacious move of my career, by our 5th year, Ecotech Solutions had transformed from my little project into an industry powerhouse. We employed over 300 people across 3 continents. Our client list included manufacturing giants that had once seemed untouchable. Our technology was reducing industrial waste by millions of tons annually, while simultaneously increasing profitability. For our partners, we had moved beyond software into integrated hardware solutions. Our sustainability consulting division was helping companies navigate the increasingly complex regulatory environment, not just as a compliance issue, but as a competitive advantage. Personal success followed professional. I moved from my tiny apartment into a comfortable condo. I was invited to speak at industry conferences, profiled in business publications, even approached about writing a book on sustainable manufacturing. The failure my family had predicted was now a respected industry leader. I maintained the values that had driven me from the beginning. We paid living wages to all employees. From janitors to executives, we practiced the environmental responsibility. We preached. We turned down clients who only wanted to greenwash their image without making substantive changes. Anthony Blake, CEO of rival firm tech manufacturer, once remarked at an industry event, "She's not just following market trends, she's creating them from conviction." Had dropped 40% over 18 months. They had closed 1 manufacturing facility and laid off hundreds of workers. Richard Palmer kept me updated on the increasingly desperate attempts to save the company. They've brought in 3 different consulting firms, but your father rejects any suggestion that requires fundamental change. Ethan is pushing for cost-cutting measures that will only accelerate the decline. Then came the news I had been both expecting and dreading. Strathmore Dynamics was officially for sale. Not publicly. They were trying to keep it quiet to avoid further market devaluation. But they had engaged Hamilton Mergers and Acquisitions to find a buyer. The timing couldn't have been more significant. Ecotech had just closed a major funding round that gave us substantial capital for strategic growth. We were actively looking for acquisition opportunities to expand our manufacturing capabilities. From a purely business perspective, Strathmore, despite its problems, had valuable assets, client relationships, and market position that aligned with our growth strategy. I called an emergency meeting with Daniel and our executive team to discuss the possibility. Acquiring Strathmore would fast-track our hardware division by years. Their manufacturing capabilities combined with our technology would create an unmatched integrated offering. Their facilities are outdated but solid. With our systems implemented, we could transform their efficiency metrics within months. The brand still has value despite recent troubles, added Kyle Bennett, our marketing director. The Thomson name carries weight in traditional manufacturing circles where we're still seen as newcomers. Let's address the elephant in the room. Jason Reed said bluntly. This is your family's company, Audrey. Can you separate the business decision from the personal history? It was the question I had been asking myself for weeks. I believe I can, I answered carefully. But I also believe we need to approach this differently than a standard acquisition. I outlined my plan. We would create a holding company that obscured Ecoteek's involvement. We would make the offer through Hamilton M&A, ensuring all communication went through proper channels. My name would not appear on any documents until the deal was finalized. Won't they find out eventually? Daniel asked. Yes, and that's intentional, I explained. But by then, the deal will be done based on its financial merits, not rejected because of family politics. Are you sure this is ethical? Sophia asked. Not the acquisition itself that makes business sense, but the concealment of your involvement. It was a fair question, one I had grappled with extensively. In a normal acquisition, no, it wouldn't be. But this situation is unique. My family would reject any offer from me out of hand, regardless of its benefits to Strathmore, its employees, and its shareholders. By removing my name temporarily, I'm ensuring the offer is evaluated on its actual merits. After hours of discussion, we reached consensus. Ecotech would pursue the acquisition of Strathmore Dynamics through a holding company with my involvement, revealed only after the deal was finalized. The next weeks were a whirlwind of financial analysis, due diligence, and strategic planning. We created Horizon Ventures as our acquisition vehicle, staffed with trusted professionals who understood the sensitivity of the situation. We secured additional financing to ensure we could make a compelling offer. We developed detailed plans for integrating Strathmore's operations with our technology. Hamilton M&A reported that several other companies were interested. Our offer, while not the highest in pure dollar terms, included commitments to maintain manufacturing operations and protect jobs, factors that appealed to several board members concerned about Strathmore's legacy. The negotiations were delicate and complex. Richard Palmer became my unofficial inside source, helping me understand the board's concerns and priorities without explicitly revealing my involvement. He believed, as I did, that this acquisition represented Strathmore's best chance at revitalization. 3 months of intense negotiation followed. There were moments when it seemed the deal might fall apart. Competing offers, last-minute demands, financing challenges. The stress was enormous, compounded by the need to maintain normal family relations during the process. Thanksgiving was approaching, and with it the annual Thompson family gathering. The timing was either terrible or perfect, depending on perspective. By my calculation, if all went according to plan, the final paperwork would be signed the morning of Thanksgiving Day, mere hours before I would sit across the table from my unsuspecting family the day before Thanksgiving. I received the call from our legal team. The board has accepted our final offer. They're signing the paperwork tomorrow morning. That night, I barely slept. Was I making the right decision? Was I saving my family's legacy, or exacting some form of revenge? Would this heal old wounds or create new ones? Together, Ecotech and Strathmore could create something greater than either company could achieve alone. As dawn broke on Thanksgiving Day, I dressed carefully for what would certainly be a day to remember. My phone buzzed with updates as the final signatures were collected and funds transferred. At 11:47 a.m., the message I had been waiting for arrived. Acquisition complete. Congratulations, Strathmore Dynamics. The company that had defined my family for generations. The company that had rejected my ideas and mocked my ambitions now belonged to me. I drove to my parents' estate, a strange calm settling over me. Whatever happened next, there was no turning back. The future of both companies and perhaps of my relationship with my family would be determined by what transpired over Thanksgiving dinner. I arrived at the family estate precisely at 2 p.m., the designated time for our Thanksgiving gathering. The familiar drive up to the Grand Colonial House stirred a mixture of childhood memories and present tension. I had made this journey countless times, but never as the owner of Strathmore Dynamics. My mother greeted me at the door with her customary air kiss, her eyes quickly assessing my outfit. A simple but elegant navy dress rather than the power suit she might have expected. "Audrey, darling, so glad you could make it," she said, ushering me inside. "Everyone's in the living room. Your father's just opened a bottle of Macallan 25. The expensive scotch suggested celebration, which struck me as odd given situation. As I entered the living room, I understood why. My father stood by the fireplace looking more relaxed than he had in months, while Ethan wore a satisfied smirk. "There she is," my father announced, raising his glass slightly. "The tech entrepreneur graces us with her presence." "Happy Thanksgiving," I said, accepting a glass of wine from Claire. "You all seem in good spirits." "We've secured Strathmore's future," he interjected. A private acquisition that will inject new capital while keeping management in place. Dad and I will continue to run operations with expanded resources. I took a careful sip of wine to hide my surprise. They clearly didn't know the details of the acquisition yet, specifically who the actual buyer was. Hamilton M&A had done their job well, keeping Ecotech's involvement confidential until the deal was finalized. That sounds promising, I said neutrally. When will it be announced? The paperwork was finalized this morning, my father said. We'll make a public announcement next week after the holiday. The acquiring company wanted to remain anonymous for now. Some holding company called Horizon Ventures. I noticed Richard Palmer watching me from across the room, the only person present who knew the truth. He gave me an almost imperceptible nod. Congratulations, I offered. I'm glad things worked out. Yes, well, some of us know how to navigate business challenges without abandoning ship, Ethan said pointedly. The dinner bell saved me from having to respond. We moved to the formal dining room, taking our traditional places around the massive mahogany table. The Thanksgiving spread was impressive as always. My mother's way of maintaining appearances, regardless of circumstances. Throughout the first course, the conversation remained superficial. Claire's children's school achievements, mutual acquaintances, recent divorces, the unusually warm weather. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. Repeatedly, but resisted checking it, knowing it would be updates from Daniel and our legal team about the post-acquisition processes now in motion. As the main course was served, my father raised his glass. A toast, he announced to Strathmore Dynamics, entering a new chapter while remaining true to the Thompson legacy of leadership. The irony was almost too much to bear, but I raised my glass with the others. And how is your little company doing, Audrey? My father asked afterward, his tone suggesting genuine curiosity for perhaps the first time. Perhaps the relief of Strathmore's apparent salvation had softened his usual dismissiveness. Ecotech is doing exceptionally well, I replied. We've had a significant expansion recently, actually. Oh, new clients? My mother asked politely. You could say that. We've acquired some substantial new assets. My father nodded absently, clearly not particularly interested. Good. For you, it's nice that you've found your niche. Still working from home, he added with a slight smirk. I'm my casual attire compared to Ethan's bespoke suit. The moment had arrived. I could feel Richard watching me intently from across the table. Sometimes, I answered, pulling out my phone. Should probably check. I glanced at the screen, pretending to read a new message rather than the notification that had arrived hours earlier. I looked up, meeting my father's gaze directly. It appears the acquisition of Strathmore Dynamics has been completed successfully. Horizon Ventures now owns 100% of the company. Yes, we know, Ethan said impatiently. What you don't know, I continued calmly, is that Horizon Ventures is a holding company created by Ecotech Solutions specifically for this acquisition. The silence that followed was absolute. My father's fork froze halfway to his mouth, face contorted in confusion, then disbelief. My mother's hand went to her pearl necklace, her nervous tell since I was a child. What are you talking about? My father finally demanded. I'm talking about the fact that as of 11:47 this morning, Ecotech Solutions, my company owns Strathmore Dynamics completely and legally. The explosion I expected didn't come immediately. Care, his face unreadable. This is a joke, Ethan declared. A sick joke. It's not a joke, Richard Palmer interjected, speaking for the first time. I've been aware of this arrangement from the beginning. Gerald, Horizon Ventures made the best offer, not just financially, but in terms of preserving Strathmore's operations and workforce. You knew. My father turned to Richard, his voice dangerously quiet. Nothing. I knew Ecotech Solutions was the buyer, Richard corrected. And yes, I supported the acquisition because it's what's best for Strathmore. The company needs exactly what Audrey's technology provides. My father's control finally broke. Allow it. It's not a hostile takeover, I said evenly. It's a completed acquisition approved by your board with contracts signed by you personally this morning. Strathmore is now a subsidiary of Ecotech Solutions. I'll fight this, Ethan sputtered, his face flushed with anger. We'll sue. This is fraud. There's no fraud, Richard stated firmly. All disclosures were legally made. The board was fully informed of the terms. The fact that you didn't investigate the buying company more thoroughly is unfortunate, but not a legal basis for challenging the sale. My mother, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Audrey, why would you do this? This deception? It was the question I had been preparing to answer. Would you have considered my offer if I had made it openly? I asked. Would you have even taken the meeting, let alone evaluated the proposal on its merits? My father's silence was answer enough. Your management, I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Not because you lack business acumen, but because you've refused to adapt to a changing world. I watched you reject innovation, dismiss sustainability as a passing trend, and cling to outdated methods while your competitors evolved. And you think you can do better? My father challenged. You who've never worked a day in traditional manufacturing? I can do better, I replied, because I'm not bound by how things have always been done. I understand both worlds, traditional manufacturing and cutting-edge technology. Ecotech has proven that these approaches can be integrated successfully. We've done it for dozens of companies already. So this is your revenge, Ethan said bitterly. For us not worshipping your precious ideas, this isn't about revenge, I said, though I acknowledged to myself that personal vindication was at least part of my motivation. It's about saving Strathmore. Without this acquisition, you are months away from bankruptcy or a private equity dismantling. I'm offering a path forward that preserves the company, protects its employees, and honors its legacy while bringing it into the modern era. Claire, who had been silently watching the exchange, finally spoke. It was the most practical question anyone had asked, and I was grateful for it. Strathmore continues operating, but with Ecotech's technology and processes integrated throughout. We'll modernize the manufacturing facilities, implement sustainable practices, and position the company for long-term growth, rather than short-term profit extraction. I turned to my father and brother. As for your roles, that depends on you. I'm not here to fire you or push you out. I'm offering a partnership. Your manufacturing experience combined with my technological innovation. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I will not be patronized by my own daughter in my own home. You may have pulled off this corporate maneuver, but don't expect me to work for you. Not for me, I corrected. With me, there's a difference. He stared at me for a long moment, decades of complicated emotions passing between us. Then, without another word, he walked out of the dining room. Ethan followed, pausing only to hiss, "You'll regret this," before storming out. My mother looked torn between following her husband and staying at the table. How you could do this to your family. I did this for the family, Mom, for Grandfather Warren's legacy, for the thousands of employees who depend on Strathmore for their livelihoods. Sometimes saving something requires radical change. She shook her head sadly and left to find my father. Only Claire, her husband, and Richard remained at the table with me. For what it's worth, Claire said after a long silence, I think you might be right about Strathmore needing to change. Dad and Ethan would never admit it, but things have been bad, worse than they've let on. I know, I said gently. That's why I did this? Richard raised his glass to me to the new Strathmore Ecotech partnership. May it be more successful than either company could be alone? I raised my glass in return. Created, whatever came next would be challenging, but for the first time, I felt that both my personal journey and my family's legacy might finally be aligned. The weeks following Thanksgiving were chaotic. My father refused to take my calls. Ethan hired a lawyer to investigate potential ways to invalidate the acquisition, though Richard assured me there were none. My mother acted as reluctant intermediary, her divided loyalties evident in every strained conversation. Integration to manage. The announcement of Ecotech's acquisition of Strathmore sent shockwaves through the manufacturing industry. Our stock price soared as analysts praised the strategic combination of Strathmore's manufacturing capacity with Ecotech's innovative technology. Strathmore SPLOs, initially fearful of a traditional post-acquisition purge, were relieved to hear my commitment to preserving jobs while transforming operations. The uncertainty of recent months gave way to cautious optimism as I presented our integration plan at a company-wide meeting. Strathmore has a proud history, I told the assembled employees, but a proud history doesn't guarantee a successful future. Together with Ecotech, we can build something that honors that legacy while creating new possibilities. Erasing what Strathmore has been? It's about evolving into what it needs to become. The integration teams moved quickly, identifying the most critical areas for technological updating. The Michigan facility, which had been hemorrhaging money, became our first test case. Within 3 months of implementing Ecotech's resource management systems and upgrading key equipment, productivity increased 40%, while energy consumption dropped by 35%. My father finally agreed to meet me at a neutral location, a private room at the City Club where generations of Thompsons had conducted business. He arrived looking older than I remembered, the events of recent months etched in the lines of his face. You've put me in an impossible position, Audrey, he said without preamble. My life too, but I can't simply surrender control either. I'm not asking you to surrender, I replied. I'm offering you a specific role that leverages your experience and relationships. I ever will. Those connections and that knowledge are valuable. As what some figurehead chairman emeritus, he asked bitterly, as chief legacy officer? I said responsible for maintaining key client relationships, preserving the institutional knowledge that makes Strathmore unique, and ensuring that as we modernize, we don't lose the core values that built the company. He looked skeptical. An actual authority-defined areas of authority, yes, not unilateral control, but not ceremonial either. Real input on strategic decisions, particularly regarding long-standing clients and partners. He considered this, swirling the scotch in his glass. And Ethan, this was more delicate. My brother's resistance had been more aggressive than my father's, his threats more explicit. Ethan needs to decide if he can adapt to the new reality. If he can, there's a place for him overseeing trade-in manufacturing operations. If not, I left the sentence unfinished. My father nodded slowly. He's always been more rigid than me, more certain of his rightness. Like looking in a mirror sometimes. Will you consider my offer? I asked. I'll think about it, he said, which from Gerald Thompson was practically a yes. Ethan's decision took longer. After exhausting his legal options and realizing the acquisition was irreversible, he disappeared to his lake house for 2 weeks. When he returned, he requested a formal meeting at the Strathmore headquarters. Was surprised when he arrived with a presentation outlining a hybrid manufacturing model that combined some of Ecotech's innovations with Strathmore's traditional strengths. I'm not walking away just because the company's structure has changed. His proposal had merit, showing more adaptability than I had given him credit for. We negotiated a role as Chief Operating Officer of Manufacturing, reporting to Daniel as overall coup, but with substantial autonomy over his department. Bringing her foundation experience and social connections to help position the new Strathmore Ecotech entity with traditional clients who might be skeptical of our integrated approach. The cultural gap between the old school manufacturing executives and the tech-oriented innovators now working together, the transformation wasn't always smooth. There were heated arguments about implementation time, but the financial results spoke for themselves. Within the first year, the combined company's profitability increased by 28%. While our environmental impact metrics showed improvements across every category. More personally satisfying was watching the cultural evolution. Engineers from Ecotech collaborating with veteran manufacturing experts from Strathmore, each learning from the other. Factory floor workers embracing technology that made their jobs safer and more efficient. The most profound change came in my relationship with my father. Our weekly strategy meetings, initially tense and formal, gradually evolved into more open exchanges. He began to acknowledge the value of the innovations I brought, while I gained appreciation for the deep industry knowledge he possessed. I had taken his old space but had completely redesigned it, replacing the dark wood and leather with a bright open concept that included a small innovation lab, where we tested miniature versions of factory floor improvements. I wouldn't have done it this way, he said, looking around the transformed space. I know, I replied, bracing for criticism, but he continued unexpectedly. Different times, different approaches. Coming from Gerald Thompson, this was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Later that same week at a major industry conference, I overheard him talking to Anthony Blake, my former rival who had once called me dangerous. My daughter sees things differently than I do. My father was saying, that different didn't mean wrong. She's building something I couldn't have imagined. But maybe that's exactly what was needed. The student becomes the teacher. My father turned, seeing me for perhaps the first time, not as his rebellious daughter, but as a business leader in my own right. More like old and new, finding a way forward together. He replied. That night I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the family disappointment to the owner of the family legacy. From being dismissed to being respected. The satisfaction wasn't improving them wrong, though that element certainly existed. Transforming Strathmore into something that could thrive in a changing world while preserving what was valuable from its past. The experience taught me that true success isn't measured by proving critics wrong or accumulating power. It's about creating something meaningful that outlasts individual egos, including my own. Products that improved people's lives. By integrating sustainability and innovation, we were honoring that mission in a contemporary context. As for family relationships, they continued to evolve. Some wound shield, while others remained tender. But there was a new foundation of professional respect that created space for personal reconciliation. Not perfect, not complete, but progress. I realized that in business as in family, the most powerful transformations happen not when one side defeats the other, but when seemingly opposing values find ways to strengthen each other. Traditional craftsmanship enhanced by cutting-edge technology, established relationships energized by fresh approaches, legacy and innovation not as competitors but as partners. What's your story of being underestimated and later proving your worth? Has someone ever dismissed your ideas only to see them succeed later? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. And if this story of perseverance and transformation resonated with you, please hit the like button. Subscribe to my channel for more real-life business journeys, and share this video with someone who might need encouragement to trust their vision, even when others don't see it yet. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the people who don't believe in you are the ones who need your success the most.